it's a capable, smart intern with the mind of a 2-year-old. I sort of think.
Or the attention span of a 2-year-old.
Attention span, yes. Meg is like the attention span of a 2-year-old.
Yeah, it's got the cognitive ability of a PhD with the attention span of a 2-year-old.
Of a 2-year-old. Exactly. That is actually the right level, I was.
Ankur Bhatt has spent the last 2 years leading AI engineering at some of the most AI-forward companies in enterprise software. As VP of AI engineering at Rippling and now head of AI at ServiceTitan, he's built production agents that handle real customer problems, tax notices, payroll compliance, things where getting it wrong costs real money. Everyone's excited about AI agents. The demos look amazing, but here's what most people won't tell you. Getting from demo to production is where most initiatives fail. Ankur just published what might be the most comprehensive practitioner guide I've read on why agents fail and how to fix them. The answer isn't a better model. It's something called harness engineering. Welcome, Ankur.
Hey, Amy. Hey, Meg. Pleasure to be here.
How's it going?
It's been a AI forward day, as always. Exciting.
I think everyone knows that we know you from SAP, and you spent like your entire childhood and young adulthood at SAP, many years, inside a massive enterprise software machine. And then you did something quite bold and you moved to smaller AI companies, starting with Eightfold, then Rippling, and now ServiceTitan. And these types of companies are moving at a completely different speed. And I'm wondering what that shift feels like.
SAP and then at SuccessFactors, what I appreciated the most was the passion for customers and helping them through their enterprise transformation and running their business day to day. That is something which has stayed with me throughout my journey at SAP. Of course, nowadays, forward deploy engineering is cool. I was maybe one of the first forward deploy engineer for our nascent product. In these startups, which I have appreciated the most is the passion for customers, the proximity and closeness to the customers, something which you start to miss in a larger organization because the layers create this separation where you're not touching and feeling how your customers are feeling every day.
I think it's always been important, but in this moment where there's a lot of change, there's a lot of new opportunity, I think it's almost like even more important to be really close, both with your own hands on these tools, but also getting really close with customers to see how they're thinking about their jobs changing and how they're thinking about things that they're eager to have access to in this world of AI. So maybe tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you and how you take what you've done with customers in the past and turn that into a discovery in this new moment.
The thing which I observe across the customers I interacted at Eightfold, Rippling, and now ServiceTitan, there is a recognition that AI is important for them, but they're looking for somebody to guide them. And a lot of times, it's less about the technology per se, but it is more about the change management of what does it mean for my org and my team and my business? How do I really maximize the benefit AI can offer me? And today, what I'm observing across the board is, I think the Claude and the Chat GPT value is very well understood across the board. They may not sort of follow the drama around OpenAI and Anthropic as we follow, but they do appreciate them as apps which they have day to day on their phone or on their browser, which they are using instead of using traditional tools as a whole. If I'm able to do these things for my personal productivity, what does this mean for my team? What does it mean for my org? And then everybody starts to sort of ask these fundamental questions and look for answers. What ends up happening is that any product they look at, they're coming in terms of similar expectation. But there is a big step up in the models in last 6 months And suddenly the capabilities they offer to people is amazingly. Any AI capability people look at in the product has to have that depth, has to have that accuracy, and has to be 10x or 5x or an x productive for them to be able to get value. And this is something which I'm finding every customer is grappling with and are looking for solutions. But they'll quickly be able to assess and say, okay, is this creating value for me or not? We have a very a feedback mechanism of thumbs up, thumbs down.
Do you get a punch in the stomach every time somebody gives you a thumbs down?
No, we were getting stream of thumbs down or thumbs up on two channels, and we could see that people when they like something, they were really giving feedback, and they don't like something, they were very clear about what didn't work. So that just shows that the rapid pace of AI, which they are using today, has changed their expectation of what AI they expect in a product and what type of an outcome they're expecting the AI should give them. And they're being very very demanding in terms of, is this just a fancy demo, or is this really going to help me run my business, answer critical questions for me, or let me run my day-to-day operations on a effective manner.
Yeah, and this whole concept of a demo versus is it really valuable is an ongoing theme, right? That we're seeing. And we've heard from some listeners of the show that they're seeing this happen in real life, where there's all this talk of, hey, one person did this in 6 days and it's already in production, but the reality is so much different, that really it was a demo, and then 6 engineers spent 3 months trying to fix all the issues and deal with all the hallucinations and the gaslighting. And so, I think that your experience, Ankur, of not only building AI applications, but actually being the leader of the AI transformation within your organizations in terms of how best to leverage the AI tools to build AI tools, quite unique and quite exciting. And as a result, you have started publishing some pretty amazing content to bring specific experience and broaden it to the larger systems thinking that we need here within the AI space. Your most recent one is about harnesses and how the improvement of models was obviously a huge leap forward for us, but that is not enough. That really we need to be understanding the harness and be tackling harness engineering. And so first of all, can you tell us what the heck a harness is?
If you talk to researchers, they got inspired by Daniel Kahneman's thinking slow, thinking fast, and that's where the reasoning came in, when to do thinking, when to do quick answering, when to look up the web. So they're becoming a system of their own, where they are making these judgment decisions on any type of inquiry we are throwing at them. And that suddenly has opened up capabilities where the models can interact with their environment and react against that environment. What does that mean? That means if model is making a call and getting a response back, it can analyze, it can reason over that response. It can then decide to continue based on my reasoning to make the next step and make the next step. The loop will run and you will get an outcome rather than a response, which is a very different thinking from a chat-like experience. In a chat-like experience, you asked a question, you got an answer. Here, you are giving an intent, you're giving an outcome you're looking for, and the model is going to reason over it till it's like this over-eager intern who will keep going on passionately and not stop till it has made you happy and given you the outcome you asked.
Or has properly gaslit you into thinking you might be happy.
You might, yes, of course.
Task completion focus for sure, as I've come to learn that it really matters that you inspect what task you give it, because it's so motivated to complete the task that
100%.
it will go about it with so much enthusiasm and go off the rails against intent pretty quickly. I think what makes your experience so unique, Ankur, is that you have lived in the software development lifecycle for your entire career, thinking in terms of software as the business that you're in and the products that you deliver. I also tend to think this is when architecture becomes more important, both understanding the architecture within the models themselves and how that's progressing, but also understanding your own architecture in interacting with that to get a result. And I suspect that's really where this harness idea becomes strong. To me, it feels very much like an unlock that we had when we started to think about object-oriented architectures and being able to really break apart bigger systems, but to scale, not just scale what the systems could do, but scale how the teams were
Yes.
able to build and to create products. So coming back to the harness piece, help us understand, what is the audience for which a harness becomes no longer a nice to have, but a must have? And what are the kind of problems that having a strategy around harnesses become an unlock for productivity within the software development world?
It's sort of like, when we had web or mobile, right? We all got conditioned to the idea that when we transition from web to mobile, the interface is changed. The phone knew your location. So our expectations on opening an app like Uber or Lyft meant it knew where I was and where I needed to go. And there's like certain conveniences sort of came in when I moved from a browser-based experience to a mobile app-based experience, right? And it is sort of similar, which an agent type of an experience is going to create for all of us, wherein the software will understand our intent and run through this loop to get us the outcome. So first and foremost, people should think about what's happening when they're asking these systems to take actions on their behalf, because they will see this everywhere.
I'm sorry, I just really want to clarify what a harness is for folks. So, there's the model, and then for a time we had prompts, and now we have harnesses. And so harness is kind of like an Uber version of a prompt.
The term came from Manus, was the company which based out of Hong Kong, which got acquired by Meta. That was one of the first ones who built sort of such an initial harness, because everybody was trying to figure out, if I give a model and give a task, give some tools to it, give an outcome, it will run and try to satisfy the outcome. And people started iterating around how to maximize this. How do you take this power of the model, its ability to call tools, take actions, but then get to a more deterministic outcome at the end? Because these are all probabilistic systems. We are used to a well-defined software world where we define a requirement, we implement something, and the software does exactly what it does. And if it doesn't do the requirement, then it's a bug. With probabilistic systems, it's not a bug, actually, because the model is relying on set of instructions given to it to achieve that outcome. And those set of instructions are not just the simple prompt you gave, because the harness is taking your prompt, the task you're giving it, it is taking your instructions essentially, and then translating for the model with giving it set of tools if possible, giving it set of memory, giving it set of essentially components to help the model achieve the outcome. And I think that's why we are seeing success of those harnesses. But the primitives these tools have built are using, like are something which everybody is can use to build an agent. Because if I'm in a legal and I'm building an agent, or if I'm in tax, I'm building an agent which should handle a tax notice, which is one of the examples I built. Or if I'm in Rippling or in Service Titan, I'm building an agent to be a chief of staff of a business owner, then I can learn from these coding harnesses how they are taking an instruction given by a product manager or a business person and translate into something working code. And that's where the term harness has started to come from.
And so, Ankur, you've identified that there's 3 failures that are very likely that people are going to run into when using. And can you identify what those 3 failures are?
There are 3 things which always go wrong: the compound error of the decisions it takes, the context overload of the information it maintains, and the specification vacuum, lack of clarity of the instruction. First, it is making decisions. Every time you give it a task, it's not taking one decision, it is taking series of decisions. So I give a task to harness, like cowork. It first reasons over it, calls some tools, gets some answers, then reasons over it again. So there is a compounding effect in a certain task I give it. It's typically making 5 to 10 to 20 decisions over what it is observing is happening. And if my first decision is wrong, or my second decision is wrong, my third decision is wrong, it just compounds. You may have seen working in co-work, it will start and it will go down a path and you are wondering like why it is going down that path. But it just does because it's sort of reasoning, acting, observing, reasoning, acting, observing. It's taking decisions and it just goes down that hole and it compounds. That's one. Second, there is a limit of information the harness can pass back to the model. That's what we call context. Think of it as the amount of information that can be sent to the model at any point in time, which means I have to keep this information like clean and fresh, because you asked me a task, I'm working on it, I take an action, I observe. So I'm building a lot of information around what I acted, what I observed. This is what is called context management, because essentially what you're doing is helping the model like take actions, put something in some memory to understand what action it has taken, and then reason over it and do the next one. And this overload happens very fast if the information is not managed well enough. And third is what I call the specification vacuum. So you can give a single line as an instruction or a task, the model will take it and the harness will give it to the model and start running. But you can also give it a well-defined instructions. It's like, I always use the metaphor of an intern. All of us have had interns who come and work for us. And I can give a ill-formed task to my intern and say, go and fix this website for performance, right? Now it's very vague, which website, which UI, performance in terms of what is exactly not clear on performance. And the overeager intern may still go and spend 2 days and come back and say, I looked at your website, but I couldn't find what is slow. And you may say, oh, I never wanted you to work on this website. I wanted you to work on the app, but you never specified that to the intern. And that's the same problem. The agent will get lost. And why it will get lost is because the harness will take an action, give the information back to the model, and it will keep reasoning over it and keep going on. And you will be like, no, this is not what I meant. So those are the 3 things I always come back to.
It's almost like these systems are anybody that's had to sort of work with an ADHD partner or child. It's you really have to be the executive function for these agent design, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of drift along the way.
You are absolutely right, Meg. I have a 2-year-old, and if I try to give it too much instructions, he will not carry all those instructions, right? And it's exactly the same with a coding agent, where if I give it too much instructions, it will like pick up the last sentence and just run with it and forget about all the three things I said before it.
What was the middle thing again? Is
What was the
the
middle thing again?
famous quote from Fish Called Wanda. Yes.
Yes, exactly, right. What was the, and that's exactly what happens. So Cowork is an example of a agent which internally has an harness and is calling and has the model essentially, and they are constantly working on solving these three problems. But of course, they can only do as much as the humans using them, right? Like if I don't specify clarity of my specification, if I'm giving too much of information and too much of my context, then even they can't handle it. Not because that it didn't try, it tried very hard, but you couldn't get the productivity you were hoping for, or you couldn't get the productivity you saw others are getting.
And so
that's
lucky for us, you have some answers to these problems, I believe, right? 6 principles that that you've introduced, and some really practical steps that people can take to avoid these failures. Do you want to share?
Yeah. So the 6 principles are in order. Give agents map, not manual. Map is a simple step of directions, not detailed instructions. Principle 2, spec before coding. So define what done looks like before the agent even writes a single line of code. Principle 3, tests as guardrails. So establish that the harness will run tests automatically. Failures means the agent has to stop, not us having to make it stop. 4th, architecture as enforcement. So basically use hooks and design of your system to enforce the patterns it should follow. So your architecture enforcement has to be a deterministic set of rules that get executed. 5th, I tend to think of these agents you may be using as multiple different interns with different personalities. Use different models, different agents, do a cross-agent collaboration, enforce that to get maximum outcome. And last but not the least, failures, when you observe that the agent is not doing something, treat them as bugs of your harness. Fix the harness around in terms of what you could have done better in terms of giving it the map or the spec or having some test or some hooks, rather than think that, oh, my better way of prompting will solve the answer.
Awesome. Okay, so now if we talk about that context problem and the 2-year-old's inability to remember the middle, there's a variety of components within the harness that you can leverage in order to set the context window. And those are the instructions, the skills, the hooks, the memory, all these different components. When do you put something in a skill? When do you put something in an instruction? How do you think of this from a systems perspective, but in the best way to get that 2-year-old intern, doing what you want?
It's a capable, smart intern with the mind of a 2-year-old. I sort of think.
For the attention span of a 2-year-old.
Attention span, yes. Meg is like the attention span of a 2-year-old.
Yeah, it's got the cognitive ability of a PhD with the attention span of a 2-year-old.
Exactly. That is actually the right level, I will say. You will laugh, but I sort of think about it in terms of, there is a Montessori education. And if you look at how they organize toddler classrooms, they're essentially doing some sort of a harness engineering. Clear example I'll give you, in my toddler class, they have different stations. So that's a way for the toddlers to remember, this is where you go and play art. This is where you go and do play with dinosaurs. This is where you go and do, water play, right? And that's a map given to my 2-year-old. They don't need to remember all the details. All they need to remember is water play, this, dinosaurs this, painting that. And that's essentially is the first principle of a map. People create Claude MD or Agent MD, which are long and like, don't do that. Make it very simple and directive, giving it more like an index. The second principle is that once you are on the station, of course, you are supposed to color. They don't know how to color. They don't know how to use a color on a paper. So what do the teacher does? It writes or shows them, show and tell. This is how you do it, which is essentially a spec. This is what you are telling the model. So before you get the model to start generating code for you, which it will, you are spending time with it and saying, this is the problem I'm trying to do. What should done looks like? The model is going to reason over your instruction. Because if you don't want the model to reason, then you're essentially not tapping onto the power it has and trying to dumb it down, and they never can be dumbed down.
What's cool about this, Ankur, is, obviously in my role, I've had access to amazing architects and great product people. And I have all over the years had, my share of decent ideas and terrible ideas and all of the things in between. But what I always had access to was to be able to sort of say, okay, well, I think we should go after this thing, or I think it should roughly be this, and pause and have the questions that these experts asked me help inform my own clarity of my idea, because oftentimes there would be big gaping holes in the middle that weren't even hard for me to articulate what I wanted. I didn't even see them. And so then when somebody would say, well, okay, but then what would happen in this case? And I would be like, oh, okay, well, then I would want it to do that. Or, well, what would happen in this other thing? Oh, well, what? And then if you do this, you're going, it's going to take 10 times as long. Do you really want that? No, I want it to be something, I could have more variance on the answer if I got it to some level of precision that's more than sufficient for this particular task. And so what I see here is giving that kind of expertise and availability to everyone if you follow your methodology, which is instead of just telling it to go do stuff, have that conversation element in the spec creation that helps you not only better understand the holes in your own thinking, but also avoid, to your point, going on a compounding tangent that
Correct.
causes you to end up in a place where you're like, well, this isn't anything I wanted at all.
Right. And that's the planning mode, right?
That's the planning mode, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like the funny thing is, even before these tools introduced planning, then it became very clear that I had to really write down what they do, which is one of the reasons I started writing, because we are all learning this together. So the more we share each other's learning, we can collectively understand how to harness these agents for our advantage, essentially. But Meg, going back to what you said, right? I think there is also this misnomer now, just because I can get code created just so fast that I don't need to do a PRD or a design anymore. That's just a fallacy. We were doing these artifacts for us, for debate and discussion between us. Is the requirement very clear as PRD, epics and stories and user journey maps and jobs to be done, to make sure that we can pressure test it before the code gets written. The only difference is you're not writing for an engineer now anymore. A junior engineer, you're writing for the model. So the instruction format is starting to change. And that's why people are talking about different types of markdown files these days.
And now you've mentioned skills and hooks as well, right? In addition to the instructions and the specs. And so what's a skill versus what's a hook?
So if you look at any skill, it is actually nothing but precise set of instructions. It's essentially saying to the model, oh, I'm telling you to read this PDF. You don't have to go around figuring out how to read this PDF. I'm just giving you a PDF skill, and you just, whenever you need to read a PDF, just tell my skill and my skill will figure it out.
And how does it know to go to that skill?
That is where the map comes in. because in the map, each skill has a unique identifier. So Anthropic is one of the first ones who pioneered this. Barry Zhang and his team from Anthropic, they were the innovators on this. In the file of skill, there is a header which says the name of the skill is PDF something, and it has a one line description of the skill. Anthropic calls it progressive disclosure. So you're not telling it, oh, these are the 5 tools you can use to do a PDF document. There is one skill, and that the skill will then internally take care of 5 types of PDF reading tools. Whichever ones are needed, it will take care of that and figure it out. But that complexity is not exposed to the model.
Imagine that when you're dealing with engineering teams where you have multiple people and you're onboarding them, having some of this, sort of codified for everyone would simplify things.
Oh, absolutely,
And
Meg.
also make sure you don't end up with bigger compliance risks than you're wanting to have in this context.
100%. So one of the things we've done is create a skills marketplace, essentially, where you are codifying and encapsulating, okay, this is how we do tests, this is how we do code review, or this is how you do sanity check. And these are all then auto-configured and deployed on every developer's machine. So the moment you set it up, so that the cognitive load for a new engineer is much less. Once you got an AI curious experts who are running ahead, codify their practices into skills and publish it for the rest of the organization so that they can then essentially get to the same level of productivity.
Sounds to me like we're just in some ways reinventing or creating a next generation of what we in the past might have thought of as platform teams, that were creating tools and guardrails and guidelines that informed the entire engineering stack going forward.
Essentially, you're capturing your domain knowledge as skills and encapsulating it and letting the platform teams essentially then build the harness and then run. I do want to come back to, Amy, your other question around hooks and tests, right? So on one side, you're doing specs and like map. On the other side, going back to my toddler metaphor, essentially, there are rules he has to follow on the station. Like if he's on a water station, they don't need to splash. Those are guardrails, essentially, right? Let's take Claude Cowork as an example. You give an instruction. How does Cowork know that it has done the right thing? When you are asking Cowork to build an app, you can build test and also get Cowork to run the test constantly, the TED metaphor. In fact, one of the ideas Simon Wilson talks about is start with TDD, get the harness to write your tests, and then tell it, keep going on till the test pass. So that way it has the guardrail, which is telling it, I have to build the spec. The spec has these tests, and all the tests have to pass till I finish. Guardrails essentially get implemented as hooks in the system. So hooks is a technical term, which actually again Anthropic came up with for Claude, where you could add specific instructions which the harness will call and check. And output of that, it will say, did I finish correctly? You can write basically 2 types of hooks. One is functional hooks, right, which is testing the functionality and making sure it's working correctly. And second, you can have hooks which are non-functional in nature, which is checking patterns, checking, code quality, checking, reference integrity, looking at secrets. These are deterministic routines which always run. So the model then knows, oh, I am not complete yet. My task is not complete because the review is highlighting some errors. And there is this meter study which measures how long can models keep going on like this.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole idea of long horizon tasks are coming in. I've been able to achieve, like, following these principles where I built a spec and I let it run for almost 2 hours. It
Oh.
will, like, I can let it start and I can go and have my lunch and come back, and it 2 hours is running. And
Yeah, there's gonna be like competitions of who can have the longest running thing that actually does the thing it's supposed to do, right? It'll be like
need
the
accuracy.
new egg drop, right? Like
Yes,
you're
yes,
right?
100%.
How
Yes,
high
yeah,
can you
yeah,
drop the egg?
yeah, 100%.
So Ankur, I've been using these tools and doing quite a bit of building and fixing with vibe coding and so on, but it's just me, right? Like it's just a single person, so it's pretty simple. Um, and of course, you're in this world of building enterprise software with lots of people involved. This is kind of like the new SDLC, right? And like what are you seeing as being like the biggest coordination costs, and how are you mitigating those?
Not everybody is able to comprehend how to maximize productivity using these agents. In any team, there are 10 to 20% of the people who are AI curious, who are experimenting and figuring out how to maximize, the output and accuracy from these agents. So the teams and orgs are struggling to scale up. Like, how do I take and bottle up this productivity my 100x engineer has and offer it to the rest of the org? So it's not very intuitively obvious what it takes to get productivity from them. So going from individual productivity to team productivity is the first lever challenge. The second challenge is making an organizational change to get value out of these tools. In a classic world, you followed Scrum or Agile and you did some routines in a certain manner. Look at the world now we just talked about, where I can let hundreds of agents run for hours and hours overnight and get the code created. That means my org and the team doesn't need to function in that old way at all. People are like people are coming up with routines where they spend hours and hours on the spec and code and the hooks, and then they let the teams are then letting the agent run overnight, and then they come back next day to see the entire application done for them, entire products and features done for them. So this means you have to rethink and reimagine how your different roles interact and interface with each other. You still need a PM, or you still need an architect or a designer, and you still need those capabilities, whether it is like in specific people, or it's a certain degree you want everybody to have certain skills, a certain depth of knowledge, so each of them can then maximize and get better outcomes from these agents
So are
essentially.
the different roles and the way that they interact in order to have the best functioning team, is that starting to coalesce, or is it still in kind of experimental, constantly changing form?
It's a constantly changing
Mhm.
experiment mode
Yep.
because the harnesses are not sitting idle. They are innovating at a breakneck pace. If you saw the latest Cloud Code version, now it has now the background task and schedule task and routines. It can run like on its own, learning from OpenClaw. Peter's key innovation with OpenClaw is actually building a harness which is like far ahead with anybody else, which is why everybody is now studying that OpenClaw harness to say, how do I bring those things into my harnesses? And and to me, that is what is something which is it requires you to then think about what it means in your roles day to day. And so that's one side, and then second, we are at an inflection point where those roles are changing drastically because writing code is no longer the bottleneck. So if writing code is no longer the bottleneck, then what an engineer has to do, what a PM has to do, or what a designer has to do, each of them has to evolve to figure out how they collaborate together. Or do you need all three people? There are points of view, designers can evolve into this person who can do that for you. There could be engineers with the product sense, they can evolve into that, or product managers with system design sense can evolve. So all of
But to
that.
some degree, you really need more people being able to do those upfront specs and all the harness engineering because you have so much capacity now to do the coding, right? Like it's
Correct.
like the bottleneck is more front loaded now than
Yes.
back loaded,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I
Exactly.
actually I actually am starting to believe that there's two different bottlenecks, and I'm willing for this point of view to evolve. I think you need your systems thinkers building not just these harnesses, but the entire life cycle process. Which parts need to be consistent? Again, if you're dealing with big systems, which parts need to be consistent, and how do you avoid having everybody having to roll their own, getting more leverage across? And then I think to your other point, Amy, now when you start to think about like how to build features and capabilities, getting more in that front end of clarity of what to build, how it should work, and what would be the proper evaluation criteria to know that you achieved it. The question that I have in the back of my mind, Ankur, and I again recognize we're still early days. What is, in your mind, the proper kind of center of gravity unit of work for a capability? Is it one person that owns it end to end? Is it a couple people? How would that be broken up? And at what level of granularity would you want to think about subdividing so that, because in the end, you're probably delivering multiple things to customers that need to make sense together. So are we going to get like all of these like teams of one plus, millions of agents building a bunch of stuff, and then at the end you've got this terrible Frankenstein thing that doesn't come together very nicely because it's missing its soul? Like what's your thought about the unit of work?
I think as product builders, you still have to create value to your customers. So you have to really work backwards from that lens, and that has not changed. You still have to think about what is valuable for your customers, and have somebody who owns that definition of value and outcome that you're going to deliver to your customers. And that has to be a single owner deciding and debating and taking inputs from everybody else to decide on what's the outcome and the value we deliver to our customers. Is then having a set of either agents which are doing this on their behalf, or humans working together, like, which is where the idea of flexible teams comes in. Because if it is a simple enough task, or maybe a single person with a set of agents can do it because the harness is built strong enough.
I think you said you had 3 things, but I think you only said 2. Was there a third? Did you want to get to that?
When you start experiencing agents as a interaction model, and you start seeing an agent runs and delivers you an outcome, your lens about everything else changes. And that means I don't build any features anymore. I challenge people who think about, oh, you're building features to get capabilities in your product, but you're not taking a step back and asking, I was always building this software to deliver an outcome for the customer. What is my agentic experience to do that? Offer that agentic experience. What type of a harness I need to build in my product to launch those experiences, and then really completely reimagine my product interaction model from a point and click or a mobile app type experience to an agent driven interaction. And that, because we are so lost in 1 and 2, very few people are starting to reimagine like agents over apps, right? Because I challenge people who say, I want to run fast, but if you're still creating a traditional web UI where people have to point and click and do, you're creating something which is no longer relevant. And to me, one of the classic examples was in Andre Karpathy's podcast, No Priors. He talked about how he uses OpenClaw to manage his home. And he said very subtly that he had 5 apps to control temperature, sound, etc., etc. And now he has 1 agent, which takes care of that for him. So if that is the kind of experience you can offer to your customers, why would you still create an app or a UI and a point-and-click type of an experience? And that type of reimagining, organizations are not doing. And I feel very passionate about it because I want to make my life simpler and I want more agents to do stuff for me on the behalf. And I want everybody to think in agents and offer me their agents and have my agent talk to their agents. And I don't want to go to a UI and click something anymore. But that type of reimagining is not happening that more. And this to me is the third biggest challenge, because the moment you do 1 and 2, you will immediately reach the conclusion, why am I still creating this experience for my customers? I'm not offering it to my engineers.
And I think this gets to one thing that people have to watch out for, and that is that the customers that you're talking to probably don't have a full appreciation for what their future looks like when it's agentically enabled. And so it's on you as the person that cares about the customer to be able to read between the lines. If it is an agent using that, it is still your responsibility to not get a little bit confused by the data, because we already said agents are very task-oriented and may, beat against something. That doesn't mean that's the most efficient or best way to solve the problem. And in a B2B context, you have not only the person that's using that solution, which may be an agent, as you said, but the business value that the organization is trying to drive. And oftentimes people struggle to understand those two layers are both a yes and. You have to think about both at all times.
Absolutely, Meg, because we were conditioned to just create a well-formed complex UI and we threw the problem over to our customers, saying, you figure out my application to get the outcome you want.
That's right.
And that's no longer the case anymore. Now I have to do the work to figure out what is the outcome they're looking at. How do I have skills, my domain skills to call the right tools within my product? How do I have hooks to measure that outcome happen? And what I previously wrote about, how do you go from creating an agent product, which is not a demo, but a real trusted agent, which your customers can rely on day to day. Which my hope is like more and more work starts to happen, more and more thought starts to happen, because there is a whole lot of new experiences that have to be created. Think of all like in co-work or in Claude Code, we have complete new way of experiencing things, right? Like the loop running and Claude has this funny like vocabulary of stuff it booping and blabbing and it uses, right? That's an interaction. That's an example of they figured out, okay, what do we do when the loop is running? Let's use some funny words, Julianing and so that people will stay interacted. But in a B2B world, when you're creating an agent, you have to think about different interactions. How do you show traces that the human can trust that, okay, agent is looking at the right thing? There is a whole sort of, I would say, class of components and experiences and primitives to be created to make these agents real in enterprise.
I think we nailed it. I think this has given us a lot.
There's like so many more questions I have. We'll have to wait for your next paper.
Yes.
Ankur,
yes.
And then I'll
I can go on. You can see me, Amy. I'm so passionate about this.
So thank you so much, Ankur. We really appreciate both you coming and sharing with our audience, but answering all our questions offline when Amy and I get stuck. You are a gem for so much patience and so much support. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting Amy, and pleasure sharing and learning together.
All right, Meg, you ready to Leadership Corner?
Let's Leadership Corner.
All right, here we go. In the last 9 months, I've been promoted twice, and the CEO has adopted my approach as best practice across the organization. I'm clearly adding value and growing fast, but I'm lonely. I'm the most senior woman here, and most of my C-suite peers are emotionally immature. They react in the moment while I step back and see the big picture. I'm managing egos when I should be collaborating with peers. Do I stay and continue modeling a better way of working, or has this company become too small for me?
Ooh, big question. So first off, I love the reflection. I think it's important to constantly take a pulse and ask yourself both your goals, your growth levers, and and is the environment ripe and fruitful. And I also, congratulations, being promoted twice is a big deal, and it does signal a lot of trust. And I believe that having built upon that creates a lot of really good opportunities. So my instinct, and again, this is based on my own sort of values and goals, is that you're probably need to reassess what your expectations are of your peers and your group. And what I mean by that is when you get to a certain level of seniority, you really need to start building groups that help you and support you and can be there for you. So Amy and I have sort of taken on the Melinda Gates language of trust counsel, people that you trust, that know you, that can give you advice, that can support you, that can help build you up. I have yet to be in a work environment where that trust counsel is guaranteed to be in my peer group. I have also been in many work environments where my peer groups had a lot of different motivations, skill levels, and interests that were not well aligned with my own. And I've had a pretty broad range of reactions and emotions to that, some more helpful than others. And so if I were to summarize the wisdom that I think I've built up over the years, is that it is very important to build trusting relationships with your peers. It is very important to accept your peers for who they are and where they are, and to work to support them in that, as opposed to expect them to be something that they are not. And it is likely the case that your response of loneliness is a lot about just the level that you've achieved versus necessarily a failing of your peers. So if the challenge is loneliness, I guess my response would be, you need to address your loneliness by adding other groups that you interact with to help you with that. If the challenge is opportunity in the job or ability to get good work done, then that's when you need to think about exiting. So I'm not hearing that opportunity isn't coming your way and growth isn't coming your way. And I'm also not necessarily hearing that your peers are sabotaging you or that you're dealing with a narcissist or anything like that. So I think this is probably, at least to my read, a moment to say it is time to expand your network of mentors and trusted people that help you with the loneliness and the collaboration and the ideation, and let go the idea that that's the responsibility of your peers. That's my read, or that's what I would say.
First off, Meg's a liar. No. So we did have a situation where we had the amazing truth counsel.
I thought of that when I said it.
Well,
yes, that's true. But not everybody.
Very rare. It's very unusual.
And it lasted like a very short window of time.
And you have to appreciate that moment and relish it at the time and know that it will not repeat itself. Okay. So a couple things to add. So in terms of the peers, I love what Meg was saying. In terms of, I am always looking for people's strengths and opportunities to connect with them. And so I love Meg's advice here. Now, you say they're emotionally immature and they have big egos. You're going to be able to find strengths. You're going to be able to find common ground. You're going to be able to find ways to connect, unless you are dealing with extreme personalities like a narcissist or a saboteur or a narcissist that is a saboteur. So if you're dealing with that level of emotional drain, then that's maybe a different scenario altogether. But that's not necessarily what I'm reading into this. The other thing that I would say, in addition to building kind of your external truth council where you have that support, really focus a lot of your emotional energy on hiring and development. So you talked about, should I be modeling a better way to work? Think of that not necessarily as to your peers, because that, maybe is a bit patronizing, is a bit, off-putting to them and not going to help you with your goal of building trust and community. But in terms of, thinking about who you're hiring and how you're developing your people and the other people within the company, start building that muscle that way. Anything else to add? Anything I lied about there, Meg?
No. You're the one that called me on the lying, so you're absolutely right. I did misspeak. But I did think that there's one thing to add, and that is the managing egos is an executive skill. It's a job you have to figure out how to do. It is not the fun part of the role, but it is absolutely a big part of the job in my experience. And I don't think my experience is that unique in that area. So when you work with people that have been to a certain level of career or professional success, you're just going to have to figure out how to navigate big egos. So while I'm not loving that for you, I think you could tell yourself a different story and say, hey, this is a skill that I need to build some resilience for, and think about it that way.
Wonderful. Well, what a fun time we had with our Ankur.
Oh my goodness. Yes, my brain is still swirling with all the ideas. Anybody that hasn't yet read his articles, I strongly recommend it, but make sure it's on a moment where you have some time, because they're pretty deep and pretty hefty.
Yeah. Lots to unpack there. It hit me hard. It in my tracks.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Anybody else suffering from the Claude E writing giving you, I think I'm moving up the value chain from like anxiety and annoyance to actual irritation and agitation. So anyway, I don't know where that goes next. Probably rage. So I will try to manage
Rage quitting, I think, is or rage maxing. Maybe would you be rage?
Oh yes, we should be maxing more things anyway, Amy. I think we got to work on our maxing. So in the spirit of maxing on the Meg and Amy show, thank you to all our listeners. We really appreciate you. Please do like and subscribe, and let's invent the future together, everyone. I believe in us.
Let's make every day count.